In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up Stripe payments in your application. We're going to be handling one-time payments, but I'm not only going to just show you how to set it up, but I'm also going to explain exactly how everything works. I have diagrams to go over all the step-by-step processes between your client server and Stripe. I'm going to show you how to set up the Stripe dashboard properly to get everything working, and I'm going to tell you all the different gotchas and things that you need to worry about to make sure that your system is not only functioning properly, but is also secure and fault tolerant. Welcome back to WebDevSimplified. My name is Kyle, and my job is to simplify the web for you so you can start building your dream project sooner. The first thing we need to understand is how our starting code looks, because I do have some starting code just to kind of give us this boilerplate that we see on the right-hand side here. We have a server and we have a client. We're first going to take a look at the client because it's relatively straightforward. Pretty much everything is in this main.ts file, and it's all inside this setup products function. You can see there's nothing else inside of our code. And if we look at our index.html, it just has this div that says products, and then this h1, which has that store text inside of it. So if we go inside of our main file, all we're doing is we're getting the products from our backend. So we're querying our API to get our products from our database or wherever else they're stored, and we're getting the products that someone owns as well. So we can keep track of how many different things someone has purchased, and we can keep track of what our total list of products is, so we can view it in the store over here. And that total list of products is just all these products here. And this number 0 just tells me how many products that person owns. So if the person that I'm currently logged in as owns like 10 laptops, this will say 10 instead of 0. Now the rest of this code in this section really doesn't matter too much. Essentially, we're just looping through each one of our products, and we're just rendering out some HTML that renders that product with a button right here for purchase. But right now, when I click that button, it doesn't do anything at all because it's not tied to any certain events or backend or API at all. So really, this is just a visual representation of what this store looks like on the right. Now, if we look at the server, this code is also relatively straightforward. If we come into here, you can see that I'm using Hono as my application of choice, and we just have two API inputs. We have the get products, which is just returning a JSON representation of our products. In our case, our products is just a JSON file inside of here. So you can see we have a JSON file with all of our products, but you can imagine this is like some database or some other place where you're storing your information. It really doesn't matter where this information is stored. I'm just using JSON because it's the easiest to get started and working with. And then we also have this owned products. Right now, I'm just returning an empty array because we're not keeping track of who has bought different products and so on, because we don't have product implementations for purchasing. You can see I have a to-do set up to handle that. And then I'm just serving this server on localhost 3000. So my server is on localhost 3000 and my application is on localhost port 5173, which is the default port. Now, before we start diving into the code to actually implement all of the logic here, I first want you to understand how Stripe works with payments, because that's the most important part. Once you understand that, the actual code itself will make a lot of sense because it's really not a lot of code. So we look over here, we can kind of see a basic implementation of how a single payment is going to work inside of Stripe. The first thing that's going to happen is on your page, someone is going to click a purchase button for a product. So in our case, they would click purchase to buy this laptop for $1,200. Then what's going to happen next is it's going to call to your server to get the information for that product. Because if I were to just say, okay, you know what, my laptop costs $1,200 and send $1,200 up to my server, and then the price is made from that, that's going to implement a security vulnerability because I can never trust the information coming from the client. Because while I send across $1,200 in my fetch request, someone else could make a fetch request to my API and put the price as 0, and now they're able to buy a laptop entirely for free. So instead of sending along the price, I'm just sending along the ID of this laptop information to my server, and then my server is getting the price and all the other information from my database, or in our case, we have a JSON file that is representing all of our different price information for our products. So I'm getting all my product information, I'm passing that along to Stripe, and I'm telling Stripe, hey, here's the thing that my customer wants to buy, here's their ID, email address, and everything else. I want you to create a checkout session. That's the terminology used inside of Stripe. And essentially that is just a session where they have a form that they can enter all their credit card information inside of. So I'm telling Stripe, here's all the information for my product, the price, how many they want to buy, who the person is that wants to buy it. Now I want you to create a checkout session so they can enter their information. And inside this diagram, everything in blue is handled entirely by Stripe. So Stripe is creating that checkout session for me, and it's sending us back to that page. So our client clicks on this purchase button, our server tells Stripe, hey, make me a checkout session, and then we're going to redirect the user to that checkout session. So Stripe is essentially creating this page for us, and we're redirecting the user to that page. And that page is actually hosted on Stripe's website. So you don't have to worry about hosting this page or anything. It's entirely hosted by Stripe. Now, there are ways that you can host this form on your own page, and the code is going to be very, very similar to what we have written inside the code that I'll show you. The only difference is that there will be some minor differences in whatever framework or tool you're using. So if you're using React, plain HTML, Next.js, and so on, the actual components and stuff you use will be slightly different. But overall, if you want to host your own checkout form, it's really not that difficult. But I generally just go with a version that's hosted by Stripe because it's the easiest to implement and it works across every framework and language you can think of. So it's going to redirect the user to this form, and this form just has like credit card information, email, all those different things for how they want to pay for your particular product. They fill out all of that credit card information, and you'll notice it completely skips our server and goes back to Stripe. This is the important thing. We never actually process any credit card or payment information on our server. Everything is handled entirely on Stripe's end or the user's entering information. Nothing ever touches our server, which is really important. You never want to have credit card information, bank information, or any other payment details on your server because that opens you up to tons of security vulnerabilities. Everything must directly interact with Stripe and nothing else. So that credit card information gets sent immediately to Stripe. It never touches your server, and Stripe does all the stuff behind the scenes to charge their credit card, make sure there's no fraud, all of that different stuff. And then it sends off two different requests. The first and most obvious is it tells your user, hey, this was successful, and sends them to a success page if the payment processed properly. If there's some type of error, they would tell you that there is an error and show you that inside of there as well. But 99% of the time, if they get to this point, it's probably going to be a successful payment, and it'll redirect the user to a success page. Also, behind the scenes, it's going to send off a webhook that you can listen to inside your application that says, hey, user A made a successful payment trying to purchase your product. So then what you can do is you can fulfill that purchase. So in your database, you could say, hey, this user has purchased this product and now they have access to all these features, or hey, they purchased this product, let's go ahead and ship that product out. Whatever it is, you can listen to this webhook and now you know that this was a successful payment. Another thing that's really important is when you go to that success page, you also want to call this fulfill purchase, because oftentimes this webhook right here is going to be slightly delayed. It's going to take a little while for that webhook to get to your server, and this success page is already loaded. So you want to make sure that you have fulfilled the purchase by marking the thing as purchased for the user, so they immediately have access to whatever that feature is inside of your database or code, whatever it is. So that's why we're calling this fulfill purchase function multiple times. It may be a little confusing right now why we're calling that multiple times, but when we get into the code, it'll make a lot of sense why we want to call this multiple times to make sure they immediately get the result that their purchase was successful whenever they go to this success page. Now let's go ahead and work on the very first step, which is going to be our server for getting the product information and then telling Stripe to create a checkout session. So we can essentially create a route inside of our API for doing that. So let's minimize that down. We're going to go over to our code inside the server section specifically, and we want to create a route. This is going to be a post route, and we want to make sure this post route is going to have a name related to what we want. So for example, for a specific product, so we can come in here with a product ID, we want to create a checkout session. Now again, you can call this whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. The important thing is we have access to whatever product they want to do, and we're going to create that checkout session for the user. So this is going to be an asynchronous function, which gives us access to this C variable right here. And now we can do whatever we want inside of here. The very first thing I want to do is I want to get our product. So we can get the ID from our request parameters, just like that. That's going to give us our ID property, which we know is a string. Then we can try to get our product. So we can say products.find, and I want to find the product with that ID. There we go. So this is going to give us a product. And then we just want to make sure that this product actually exists, and this should be called products. There we go. So if our product is equal to null, then we can return c.notfound. Essentially, we're trying to purchase a product that doesn't exist. This is just a sanity check that we have in place. Now to begin with, I'm going to completely ignore the fact that we have a user object and just pretend that we don't have a user object at all, just to get the most basic version implemented, and then I'll show you how we implement this with a user as well. So the first thing that we need to do is we can come in here and we can say we want to create a session. This is our checkout session, the thing that we're telling Stripe to create. This is where we do that. And we're going to be using a Stripe library for that. Now, in order to do that, if we go over to the Stripe documentation, this actually details exactly how we need to do everything. And if we scroll down, you can just see we need to install this Stripe library. I've already gone ahead and do that, but you can just type in npm i Stripe, and that's going to give you the Stripe library that you need. Then what we can do inside of our code, if we scroll down, is essentially we have the section where we're setting all that up. It's all the way kind of over here, so it's really hard to see. This is not really mobile optimized, but inside of here is where we create that session and pass along all the information that we care about. So let me show you exactly what that looks like. We're going to call Stripe, and we need to get that from our Stripe library. So all the way up here, we can just say const Stripe is equal to calling new Stripe, just like that. And that's going to come from the Stripe library. And inside this new Stripe, we need to pass it along our API key, as well as some configuration parameters. So for our API key, we'll just come in here, process.env.stripe. secret key. Since this is on our server, we need the secret key version of this. And I'll put a little exclamation point on here. That just tells TypeScript that this variable is going to be defined for us so that it's no longer undefined. And then inside the config, we can pass along the API version. You should see that there's only one value available for this. Yours is most likely going to be different than mine because when I'm currently recording this video, the newest version of the Stripe API is from June 30th of 2025, but this actually updates rather frequently. You just want to make sure you specify the API version inside of here. That way, when you call the Stripe API, it always calls the same version of the API. That way, if they update Stripe, it doesn't break your entire application. Now we need to go ahead and we actually need to get that API key inside of our library. So the first thing, I already have .env set up, so it automatically loads my environment variables for you. Depending on what type of application you're using, you may load environment variables slightly differently. But if we go inside of our .env, we can actually paste in that Stripe secret key name, and now we need to get the value for that variable. To do that, you can go to your Stripe dashboard. So here I'm on my Stripe dashboard. And the important thing is you want to make sure that you're inside of sandbox mode. It's actually a rather new feature inside of Stripe. But if you come over to where it says your name right here, you can click on this and then you can click on switch sandbox. You probably don't have any sandboxes by default and you're going to be inside of test mode. So if we switch over to that real quick, yours is going to look probably something similar to this where there's going to be this orange looking banner at the top and it's going to say you're currently in test mode. You can see right here. We want to swap over to sandboxes. It's just a little bit easier way to work. And this test mode is kind of like the older way of doing things. So we can come in here, you can click switch to sandbox, just click create sandbox. You can create an account from scratch, just give it a name, click create, and then you're done. I've already created one called dev, so we're just going to use that like this. So we can switch over to that dev mode, and then we just need to copy the API key over. The really nice thing is the API keys are listed right here, but if for some reason yours aren't listed there, you can come into this section where it says developers, and you can scroll up and you can see right here it says API keys, and that'll bring you to the page that has all your different API key information. Now in our case, we want this secret key, so I'm just going to copy that secret key over, and now we have that inside of our environment variable, and we can expand this and actually finish out what the rest of our documentation looks like to create that session. So if we scroll down here, we have our Stripe variable. We can get the checkout portion because we care about checkout and we want to get a session for that. And we can just create that. And this is going to take a lot of information inside of it. The first is going to be our mode. So are you doing a payment or are you doing a subscription? In our case, we're doing a one-time payment. So we're going to start this with a payment. Next, if you had customer information, you could pass that along, but I'm going to show you what it looks like with and without. So we're going to start by not passing along any customer information. The next most important thing is our line items. This is all the different things that they're purchasing. If you had a cart, you could pass along a lot of different items, but in our case, we're purchasing one single thing. So we're just going to pass it an array that has one object inside of it. This object is going to take two specific things. The first is price data. This is all the information about the thing that we're purchasing. That's going to be an object. And then we have a quantity. In our case, we're always purchasing one, but if you wanted to be able to specify a quantity inside of a cart, you could do that inside of here. Now inside of our price data, we need to specify quite a few things. First, our currency. In our case, all of our prices are US dollars, so we're going to pass along US dollars. We also need to pass along how much this thing costs per unit. So we have our product and we know that that has a price. And if I actually go ahead and I look at my product price, we can come into our product table. You can see, for example, $250, $600, $800, and so on. But the way that Stripe handles prices is it determines your prices must be in cents and not dollars. So if we look over here and we hover over unit amount, you can see it says a non-negative integer in cents. So we cannot use dollars. We need to convert from dollars to cents. And in the case of a US dollar, 100 cents is $1. So if we multiply this by 100, we convert from dollars to cents. Then we can pass along some product data. This isn't necessarily required, but it does give you information on the checkout page. For example, if we look over here, you can see it has a name. If I just expand this a little bit, it has a name, it has an image, it has a price. All that information we can pass along into the product data. In our case, we're just going to be passing along a name, which is our product.name, and we're going to be passing along a description, which is our product.description. This just passes this information along so they can see that information on the checkout page itself. You could also pass along images and other things, but we're just going to do the basic examples. So now we have essentially all the main stuff we need for our session to set everything up. Really, the final thing left is to create a redirect URL to redirect us when we have a successful payment or when we want to cancel our payment. So if we come all the way back over here inside of this example, you can see this is the creating checkout session. We're going to redirect the user to that page. And when we process the payment, we want to either send them to a success page, or if they don't want to check out and they want to hit cancel, we need a page to redirect them to whenever they cancel as well. So we have two different redirects that we need to create. The first one is going to be our success, and that should actually be down here. There we go. Success URL, and this is where do we go on a successful request. So I'm going to go to our local host 3000/purchase/success. So I'm going to send people to this page when there was a successful purchase. And on cancel, if I spell that properly, we're just going to go to our main server. So we're going to say localhost, or not our server, our client, 5173. So that's just going to be the main page of our client. So we're just going to redirect them back to the store page if they click the cancel button. That should be all we need to do to create an actual working session. Now we just need to redirect the user to that session. So we can come in here and say redirect to the session.url, just like that. Now you will see we get an error because this URL could be null. So all we need to do is just say if session.url is equal to null, then we're just going to throw an error. This should not ever happen. We'll just say session URL is null. There we go. So now we're redirecting that user to the session anytime that we call this API method. So essentially, whenever we know what product we want, we make a post to this particular page, and it's going to redirect the user to the session which has all the checkout information on it. Now what we need to do is make sure we actually set that up on our client, because our buttons, when we click on them, still don't do anything. So if we go over to our client portion now instead, we can open up that main page, which is where pretty much everything happens, and we want to make this button make a post request to this particular page. Easiest way for us to do that is just going to be wrapping this inside of a form. We don't even need any event listeners or anything. So we can just take a form and wrap our button in that. There we go. Close that form off, put our button inside of there, and this form just needs to take an action. And this action is going to post specifically to that server. So we're going to say local host 3000/products. We want to get that product ID. So we'll say product.id. And then we want to go to the page for create checkout session. There we go. So essentially we're going to post them to this URL. And then we lastly need to specify a method. So we can come in here with a method, and that's going to be post. Essentially, are we making a post request, a get request, and so on? We want to make a post request. So when we click this button, it's going to make a post request to the URL that we just created with the specific product ID. So let's try that out. Let's go ahead and we're going to click purchase on our smartphone, and you should see we're being redirected to a brand new page. You can see at the top here, if I just zoom this in a little bit, we have the name, which is smartphone, we have the price, we have the description of our smartphone, and we have all of our different payment options down here. Now, when you're making a payment inside of Stripe, you need to pass along an email. It doesn't matter what it is. We're just going to put a fake email in there. And if you choose to use a card, the card number that you want to use for a successful payment is just 42 repeated infinitely. Then you need to specify any month and year that's in the future. So we can just do a bunch of 5s and any CVV. It doesn't matter what this code is. As long as you enter any code here, any future date, and all 4 2s inside of the number here, that'll give you a successful payment. Now we can enter any name and any zip code, doesn't matter what it is. And when we click on the pay button, it should create a payment for $800 and redirect us to that success page. Now currently we don't have a success page on our server, so we are going to get an error going to that success page, but that's okay. We'll just click the pay button and see if everything works like we expect it to. It's going to take a little bit of time to process. We see we get this little check mark, and now it redirected us to that success page. We don't have one yet, but it did redirect us to that page. And if we look, we should actually see that we have a transaction for that amount. So if we go to transactions, we should hopefully see right here at the very top, if I click on this, we have an $800 transaction for purchasing the smartphone with this description, one quantity, 800, and it has all that customer information that I passed in. And the important thing that you'll note is it kind of created a fake customer for us. We didn't pass along any customer information. It just took the email, the name, and the zip code they passed in and created a customer for that. And if we actually look at our customers section, you'll see that we have this guest customer right here that was created with the email and everything. If we open this up, you'll notice there's multiple other payments in here from testing that I was doing earlier, but you can see that $800 payment right there, which is the one that we just created. So now we need to go ahead and actually implement the success page, as well as implement the information for hooking up a specific user to our pages right now, because we're just having a guest customer, which is not exactly what we want. We want this to be tied to the actual logged in user, because 99% of the time when you're dealing with payments, you have a user that is authenticated on your site. So we can come back over here. All I want to do is I want to create a GET request, and this is going to be for our purchase/success. That's the route that we're redirecting our users to. There we go. And here what we can do is we can just say c.redirect, and we can redirect them back to the home page, at least for now. So we can say localhost 5173. There we go. So now if I just give this a refresh, it should redirect us back to the store, which is great. Now the reason that I'm not directing directly to the store inside of here where I'm doing my success URL, the reason I'm not doing that right here is because I want to make sure on my server that I fulfill all the different request information that I'm getting. Essentially, I want to make sure I save that they purchased this, increment the number by 1, whatever it is that I need to do all that on the server, and then send them back to this page after that's complete. So now let's go ahead and actually hook up a user with this and track the user's purchases that they've made. So the very first thing, whenever we're creating this session, we can pass along customer information. And I highly recommend anytime you're working with Stripe, you always create your customer before you create your checkout session. Always make sure you have a customer for the user. So what we can do inside of here is we can say const customer equals await stripe.customers.create. And now inside of here, we can pass along a bunch of information related to our customer. So what I want to do all the way up here is I want to get my user information. Now, again, you'd probably get this from a database or cookies or something else. I'm just going to hard code a user from a JSON file, data/user. There we go. And inside of this file, if we take a look at it real quick, you can see it's rather straightforward. We have an ID, we have an email, and we have a name. Nothing really groundbreaking in here. It's just basic information for our user. Now what I want to do with that user is I want to pass along all that information to our customer. So we can pass along the name, which is user.name. We can pass along our email, which is user.email. And most importantly, we can pass along metadata. This is custom data that you can set to literally anything you want. This is really useful for when you want to tie someone that's in your database, for example, your own custom user ID with the customer ID that's inside of Stripe. So I can say user ID is user.id. And now essentially I've linked this user's ID with this customer right here. So I can easily transfer between the two. When I have access to a customer, I can access the metadata property to get whatever the ID for that user is inside of my own database. So I can transfer from Stripe data to my own database and vice versa. Now inside of here, I can pass along a customer property, which takes an ID. So we can say customer.id just like that. Now I've associated this specifically with a customer that has this name and this email address. So let's see what changes that comes about. If we click on the purchase button for laptop now, for example, I'll go to my Stripe checkout page and you'll notice immediately my email is pre-filled in with the email for the customer that we created, and all the other information for my customer is also pre-filled in. So we can come in here with a card payment again. We'll just type in a bunch of 42s, get our information to make sure that this is in the future. There we go. And now if we click on save or pay for this, it should associate that with this customer right here. So when I click on pay and we go back over to our transactions, we should see we have a transaction for that customer as well. So now if we go back to our Stripe transactions, we'll go over into our customers. And now you can see that we have a customer, John Doe, user@example.com. And when I open this up, we have that $1,200 payment associated with this specific customer. And you can see we have our customer ID. And if we look at the metadata, you can see that this user ID is the user ID from our database. So now I have a way to map between a customer ID and a user ID. Now inside of our code, when we create a brand new Stripe customer, we always want to associate our customer ID from Stripe with our user as well. We've done the one-way mapping, but now we want to be able to map from user ID to customer ID. So essentially inside of here, wherever you have a database, you would just save the customer ID to the user in the DB. That's essentially what you do in this section. You would just save that information. In our case, since we're just using a JSON file, I'm going to kind of cheat. I'm just going to copy this URL and paste it directly into our JSON. So we can say something along the lines of Stripe customer ID, paste in that string just like that. Make sure I wrap that in quotes. There we go. So now we have a Stripe customer ID, which is really great because now here I can say if my Stripe customer ID is equal to null from my user, there we go. Then I want to create a brand new customer and save them inside of my database just like this. And then what I could do is I could come in here and say customer ID is equal to user.stripe customer ID. There we go. And we can say if that's null, create a brand new one. And then we can say our customer ID is equal to customer.id and then replace that down here as well. There we go. So now essentially what's happening is whenever I have no user at all that's created for Stripe, I create a brand new one and save that inside of my database right here. But if I do already have a Stripe user associated with this user, so I have a customer in Stripe associated with my user, I don't bother creating a new one. I just use that already created association. So again, I don't have that actual association mapping inside my code because we're not using a real database here. But if you did, you would just put that one line for updating your database with that information. And again, you want to make sure you store that because now I can get my Stripe customer from my database user. And since I stored my metadata, I can go from a Stripe customer over to a user inside my database. So I can easily transfer between these two and make sure they're always associated with each other. Because if you only map on something like email, email can change. Someone can update their email in Stripe or they can update it in your database. So that's a really fragile way to do this. Using IDs is the best option. So now let's go ahead and actually associate this user with specific products that they have created and owned and purchased. So if we come up here, we can just delete this code, comment in this code, and we can import this function. I created a function called getOwnedProducts. If we look at the code here, it's just reading a JSON file and getting all the products for a specific user ID. And this add_owned_product is essentially doing the same thing. It's reading that database file and it's updating based on the product ID and the quantity for the ones that they own. It's just pushing that in and then resaving that in that JSON file. Again, to emulate what a database would look like, I'm just using a JSON file so it's easier for testing purposes. So now if we come back and we actually look at our JSON file, you can see right now it's an empty object because nobody has purchased anything that we've kept track of inside of our application yet. So we need to go ahead and actually make sure that we handle that properly. So we've already created our checkout session. That's all correct. The only thing that we need to do is inside of our session, we can pass along additional metadata so it's easy for us to link up this purchase with a particular product and a user. So inside of here, we have our own metadata object, and I want to pass along a product ID, which is just going to be our product ID. I want to pass along a user ID, which is our user.id. Technically, you don't need to pass the user ID along here because you can get it from the customer as well, but it's much easier just to get it from the metadata here because we're easily going to have access to the session whenever we do our purchase success page, and getting the customer is just slightly more tricky. Now, the final thing we need to modify is in our success URL, we're actually going to take in a query parameter. This is going to be our session ID, and we're going to set that to a special variable called checkout session ID. And if you just put this specific code inside of brackets checkout session ID, Stripe is going to replace this with the ID of whatever that checkout session is. And that includes all the information you could ever want. For example, all of this metadata, all of this pricing data, the customer information, everything related to that session. Was it a success? Was it a failure? All of that is going to be inside of this session ID property, so we can easily get that information. So this passes along that query parameter for us inside of this section for purchase success. Now I'm going to be using Zod to give me a little bit of extra type safety. So if I come up here, I imported these libraries of Zod and this Hano Zod validator. I've already npm I installed them inside of our application. If you're not using Hano, it doesn't really matter. You may have different things that you need to do. But what I can do is I can come down here inside my success, and I can essentially pass along a middleware that is going to be using that Zod validator for the query property. And I'm just saying it has a session ID that is going to be a string, just to give me a little bit of extra type safety inside my code. So then I can say that I'm going to get my session ID, which is equal to c.request.query, just like that. Make sure I spell that properly. And now you can see my session ID is a string because I have that type safety set up. Now, if for some reason this is a null property, so session ID is equal to null, then I just want to return an error. So we'll just say c.text error, and we'll just pass along a 400 status code. So this is just letting the user know that there's some type of error because that session didn't get passed along. And then what we can do is we can just call a function fulfill payment, pass along our session ID, just like that. There we go. And this is going to take in a session ID that is a string. The reason I'm creating a separate function for this is because we're going to be using this in multiple places. For example, the webhook, if we look at our diagram here again, we need to be able to do this on success and from our webhooks. We have multiple places we need to be able to make sure we handle this fulfillment process. And all this fulfillment process is going to do is essentially call add owned product, and it's going to pass along our user ID and our product ID and our quantity. That is all of the information that we want to pass along to the user to let them know that they now own this particular product. So to get a session from Stripe is actually quite easy. So we can say that we want to get our checkout session, which is await stripe.checkout.sessions. And instead of creating, we're going to retrieve one based on our session ID. Now, the kind of interesting thing about Stripe is you can get a lot of information from this session. For example, I have all these line items. I have this customer. I have a bunch of things that can get passed along. So we need to specifically say what we want to expand. So I can come in here with expand, and I want to expand the line items property. All that's going to do is going to make sure it populates all the information for line items, because otherwise this would not give me all my information. And I want to get the information for the quantity, for example. So I need to make sure that I expand that. Otherwise, this will just return to me as no data at all to save bandwidth for people that don't actually need that information. We do need that though, which is why we're going to make sure that we get that information like this. So now we have our checkout session, which includes all the stuff that we want. First, we can check, is this a successful payment? So we can say payment status. If this is equal to unpaid, which means that they haven't paid for this product yet, well, obviously we should throw some type of error. In our case, I'm just going to return false if there's a problem. So if we have a problem, we return false, otherwise we'll return true. Next, I want to get my product ID, which is going to come from our checkout session.metadata.product ID, just like that. And this metadata is just whatever we set up here on our session. So our product ID and our user ID we're able to get from here. So we can come in here with our user ID and do the exact same thing, just like that. Now, if for some reason these values are null, I'll just do a quick check for that. So if our product ID equals null or our user ID equals null, then we're just going to return false to again say that there's some type of error because we don't have all the information we need to associate this purchase with a product and a user. Then what I can do is get my quantity as my final value. So if my checkout session.line items data, I want to get the first row from this because we only passed it an array with one single object. If you're having multiple objects being purchased, you would need to loop through this particular information. In our case, we only purchase one thing at a time. I then want to get the quantity from that, just like that. If this is equal to null, which means it's for some reason not passed along, again, we'll return false. And finally, if none of that is true, we can just pass along all the information that we want to. So inside of here, we have our user ID. Let me make sure I get the order of these proper. Yep, user ID, product ID, and then quantity. And the quantity is essentially this code right here. We can just remove this question mark since it's no longer needed. So now we're adding that. We can make sure we await that code right here. And if all of that works properly, we'll return true down here. So now I can scroll all the way up to the top. I can make sure I await this, and I can just do a simple check. So we can say const success is equal to that. And if I don't have success, then I want to essentially return an error. So we'll say c.text error, and I'll pass along that 400 status code. Otherwise, we're going to redirect him to that page. So really, all we've done with our code to modify it is first, we hooked up an actual customer with our purchase. So now here we have a customer associated with our purchase, and we made sure we associated our product ID and the user ID with that metadata. Then inside of our success section down here, we came through and we said, okay, we want to fulfill our payment with the session. We got the session information directly from Stripe. We're making sure that it was paid properly. All of our behind the scenes data is there. And then we're just updating the quantity of the thing they purchased based on what they actually bought. So if they bought one item, it'll increment our number by 1. So let's test to see if all of this code that we created worked. We'll come back over to our page, and let's say that we want to purchase a laptop. We're going to click the pay button here. It already has my information pre-filled. We can even just, for example, use affirm for our payment method. We're going to click continue, and it'll just ask us to essentially fake a successful response. We can say authorize test payment. When that's done, it's going to create a successful payment for us, redirect us, and you'll notice now this number is updated to 1 because this is being populated based on the amount of owned products they have. And if we look at our JSON, you can see the ID of P1, which is our laptop, has a quantity of 1 because we just purchased a laptop. And if we were to purchase another laptop, this quantity would increase to 2. So we'll just come in here with affirm again real quick. Give that a second to load, authorize that test payment, and we should see that this quantity, it just uploaded to 2, and you can see this has increased to 2 here as well. And this is the whole process right here where we have our process payment and we're going to our success page, but before that, we're kind of fulfilling the purchase before they render the success page. That's what this branch of the tree is doing. Now, this branch is not always going to succeed though. For example, let's say that I'm inside my code here. I want to purchase a laptop. I go do affirm, whatever it is. I click continue. And then I'm going to do my test payment. So I'm going to say, yep, authorize, and then I immediately close my page. Now behind the scenes, Stripe is going to authorize that payment successfully, but it never redirected my server. You can see this number still says 2. While if I look inside my payments here, you'll see there's actually 3 payments inside my server for that. Give it a second to load. You can see technically there's actually 4 payments in here. One was before we set up our actual quantity checking, and these 3 are after that quantity checking. So I have 3 actual purchases in here, but only 2 of them were tracked in my database. And the reason for that is because I never actually rendered that success page. It made the purchase, but it never redirected back to my user because they closed the page, or maybe their internet went out or something went wrong along the way. That's the whole idea of using the second method, which is webhooks. So now we can have a webhook that comes from Stripe that tells us, hey, this was successful. And these are much more fault tolerant. For example, if the internet goes out, the webhook never sends, it'll resend it later until eventually I have a successful response. So it'll continually retry and retry if it fails. So this makes sure that even if the success page doesn't load or something goes wrong, this is almost like a backup method that you always want to make sure you implement, because this is almost always guaranteed to send along the correct information. And if it fails, it's going to retry until you get that information. So let's go ahead and actually see how we would implement these webhooks, because it's a little bit confusing, but not too bad. If we go over to our Stripe actual dashboard right here, we click on this developer section, you'll find this section called webhooks. If we click on that, it's going to open up this section here. It may ask you to like enable certain things, like there's an overview and all that. Just click whatever it asks you to do to enable it, and you'll get brought to this webhooks section. And what we want to do is we want to set up a local listener. Adding a destination is really great when you want to deploy to production, but in our case, we're working on local development, so we're going to click set up local listener. This is going to essentially ask you to download the Stripe CLI. So you just need to click on this link. It'll bring you to a GitHub page, which tells you how to download it. It's not too complicated to do. And then we can run the command Stripe login. This is going to log you into your Stripe account. It's going to redirect you to a new page you essentially authorize. And you want to make sure that when you do this, you're actually properly authorizing to the dashboard for the sandbox that you're inside of. So if we just try to run this command real quick, I'll just open up a brand new terminal and we'll run that Stripe login command. Hopefully it'll let me do it. I might already be logged in, but we'll just give it a second. We'll run that command. You can see it redirects me to a page for me to log in with Stripe. And specifically, the thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you're selecting the correct sandbox. We're in the dev sandbox that I created, so we're going to use that. And also make sure that this text right here matches the text inside of your server for your terminal. So right here, you can see it matches exactly. If that's the case, just click allow access. And now we're properly logged in and authenticated, which is what we want to do. The next thing you need to do is you need to make sure you set up a listener. All this is going to do is anytime that Stripe has a webhook, it's going to forward that webhook to your local server that you're working on. So we want to essentially take this command, Stripe listen forward to, and we want to type in the URL for our webhook listener. So we'll say here that we have localhost. This is going to be port 3000 because that's where our server lives. Let me expand this a little bit so it's easy to read. Port 3000, we're going to call this webhooks/Stripe, and that's going to be the location where they send any webhooks that come along. So now if we give that a quick enter, you can see that it's currently running in the background. It's running right there, and it's passing along this secret key. You need to make sure you copy this secret key, put it in your environment variables. This is your Stripe webhook secret, just like that, and we're going to paste that into there. This essentially is what authenticates Stripe to let you know, hey, this is a valid webhook coming from Stripe with this particular key. It's just a safety measure that you need to make sure you have in place. Now, this third step for triggering events with the CLI, mostly I ignore because a lot of times I pass along some complicated metadata to my things and customer information. As you can see up here, we have all this metadata and customer information. So I just test it manually. I find it a little bit easier to work with. So now that we're done, we can just click done on that. Nothing will really change. You'll see down here we have a local listener, but otherwise there's really nothing super important to understand. We'll just give a quick save to all of our information inside of here. Now that we know that we have this running, we can actually get all of our webhook information directly sent to our server. So if we actually go ahead and make another purchase, you'll see that this particular page is going to render some information. So let me just make sure I go back to our server, reopen it, keep on this page, and let's go ahead and we'll try to purchase a smartphone this time. And we'll just do that same affirm payment because it's relatively simple as opposed to typing all the card information in. You can immediately see we're already getting a bunch of webhooks sent along for creating payments and so on. And when we authorize this, we're going to get even more stuff sent along, but we're just getting 404s being sent, and it's going to continually try to retry these as well because we're constantly sending 404s. And that's essentially because we haven't created this route yet. So we need to create this route and handle all the different webhooks we're going to be getting passed. And there's really not too many that we need to worry about for this really simple implementation. So we're going to come into our code. We'll kind of minimize some of the stuff we've already handled down. And I want to create an app.post because as you can see, these are all post requests. And this post request is going to be at the webhooks/Stripe URL because that's the URL that we told it to go to. You can call this URL whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. There we go. And inside of here, we need to do some very specific stuff. We essentially need to make sure that we authenticate and authorize that this is a valid event. And inside of Stripe, the easiest way to do that, especially if you look at the documentation, this is directly out of the documentation. You need to get the signature for the event, which is going to be your request.header. And you want to get the header for Stripe signature. This is, again, another security measure built in. You also want to get your secret. So that's process.env.stripe webhook secret, and we can just do a quick check to say if our signature is equal to null or our secret is equal to null. Well, we have some type of error, so we'll return an error c.text error. You could obviously give it better error messages. I'm just doing this for overall simplicity purposes. Then what we need to do is now that we have our signature and our secret, we can come in here with a try catch block, and we can try to create a Stripe webhook. So we can say Stripe webhooks.construct event. What this is going to do is it's going to take in the raw body of your document. So we can say c.request.raw.text. That's the raw body. So depending on what type of server and backend you're using, just pass along the raw body, however you get that. Then we need to pass along our signature and our secret, and this is going to return to us an event, just like that. So we'll say const event is equal to that information. And this needs to be awaited. So we'll come in here and make sure that awaits its information. And if this is an error, we just need to make sure we catch that error. There we go. And we can just inside of this catch return c.text error and put a 400. And this will error out anytime that we have a bad webhook. So if someone tries to send a fake webhook to us, That means that either our secret won't match, the signature won't match. There's going to be something wrong with the data because Stripe does certain encryption and checking to make sure everything's correct. And that's all this code right here does, is it says, hey, is this a valid webhook directly from Stripe? If so, get all the information from that event inside this Stripe event object. Then what we can do with that Stripe event object is we can switch over the event.type. And this gives me all of my different types for the events that I can listen to. You can see there are like 250 different events inside of Stripe. It's a little bit overwhelming, but you honestly don't need very many to do most things. In our case, we only need to listen to 2 specific events related to the checkout process. We need to do checkout complete. This is what happens when you have a successful payment. And we need to do the case of checkout async payment, and we want to get the not payment failed, but the other one, which is payment succeeded. This occurs anytime that you have a payment that could be slightly delayed. For example, a bank transfer is going to be slightly delayed, where Stripe will say that it was successful, and then it may take a while for the payment to actually enter your account. It may take a few hours or whatever it is to get that payment from the bank account directly into your account. So session complete is when you have like an instantaneous transfer like a credit card, or async is going to be when you have something that takes a little bit longer. Either way, though, it's going to be a successful payment inside of our application, and we want to handle both of them the same exact way. So inside of here, what I want to do is I essentially want to fulfill my request just like I did inside my other check, which was down here. So essentially the code right here where I'm fulfilling my payment, I just want to do that exact same thing inside of here. So I'm going to fulfill my payment just like that, and we'll throw in a simple break. Now we need to get our session ID. Luckily, that comes from our event. We can get the data from our event, we can get the object, and then we can get the ID from that. Now in our case, the object in this case is a checkout session because we're checking for these session related events. If you were doing other events, you would get other objects. But in our case, we're checking for a session, so we get the object with this ID. And that gives us all the information we need to make sure that this is a successful event. If it's not, we throw an error. And then finally, all the way at the very bottom of our code, what we want to do is we want to return a success. So we're going to say return c.text of success with a status of 200. And this just tells Stripe that this was a successful response, so they don't need to keep sending to us over and over again because it failed. They just know, hey, this was successful. I can completely ignore this. So essentially what we're doing is we're saying that this was a successful response. So now if I give my code a quick save, you can see I'm handling all my events inside of here, throwing errors if applicable, and then I'm succeeding either if it's an event that I don't handle, I'm just succeeding no matter what because I don't care about events that I don't handle. And if it's an event I do handle and it goes through successfully, I'll also get to this success endpoint down here. So really all this code is doing is it's just verifying, was this a valid event, then fulfill my payment just like before, and only do it for these 2 events that I care about. So now we should see that this is hopefully working as we expect, but we'll actually notice one small bug. So I'm going to come ahead and I'm going to try to purchase a tablet. You can see we have 0 of this purchased currently. I'm going to do an affirm payment because that's the quickest and easiest way to go about it. We can let this process. You can see we're already getting 200 responses, so that's a good start. Let's authorize our test payment. You can see here we had our checkout session complete, which is the one that we're actually listening for. And you'll notice something interesting though. We have 2 tablets being purchased instead of 1. The reason for this is because Stripe is sending along our webhook and it's sending us to a success page, so we're actually fulfilling our purchase 2 times. We want to make sure every time we call fulfill purchase, it'll only fulfill each purchase 1 single time. So for each checkout session, we only want to fulfill that purchase 1 time instead of multiple. We want to have the fallback of our webhook and our success page to make sure everything works as quickly as possible without any errors or missing data, but we also want to make sure we don't call this method too many different times. So the easiest way for us to get around that is go inside of our code, inside of our fulfill payment, and we'll scroll all the way down to where we're actually doing the fulfillment process. This is all just validation stuff, so we can ignore this. Right here, I want to wrap this inside of an if check to make sure, okay, have we handled this or not? That's essentially what this if check is going to do. So I'm going to create a variable called handled sessions. I'm going to check, does it have my session ID? There we go. So we can come up here and make sure that it does not have that information to actually run this check. Then at the very top of my code, we can just say const handled sessions is equal to a new set, and we'll make it a set of strings. There we go. Let's scroll all the way back down to where we were before. So now we're essentially checking to make sure we have not handled that session. And if we've not handled it, then I'm going to come in here, I'm going to add that to my handled sessions, and then we're going to actually do the processing of that information. So really with this code, I'm just making sure if I have not done this session yet, do this code inside of here. And when I do that, mark this session as being completed. So the next time I run this code, it'll say, oh, I've already handled that, just completely skip this and move on. That way, even if multiple webhooks will come through and multiple success pages come through, it doesn't matter because it's just going to say, hey, everything worked fine. We don't have to worry about anything at all. So now if I give that a save, let's try to purchase something else that has 0 items on it. So a smartwatch. we click purchase on this, we should see it'll only go through one time because essentially the second time it'll completely skip this because we've already handled that session. So let's authorize that payment, give it a second, and when we get brought back to that page, you can see it only actually added 1 to our value because it did not process this event multiple times. And that's really all it takes to create your very own checkouts like this. Really, the important thing to understand is this diagram. If there's anything you take from this video, it's how this diagram works, because once you understand this, the actual process of how the Stripe code works makes a lot of sense. The client initiates a purchase, the server sends all the information over to Stripe that they need, and then Stripe handles everything from there all the way until we actually get the success page, and then we fulfill that purchase. So really all we're doing is we're saying, hey, Stripe, create a purchase for this product. Stripe says, okay, hey, the user made the purchase. And then we say, okay, now that the user made the purchase, I want to save that in my database or do something with that data. It doesn't matter what it is, but you most likely want to do something with that data. And another important thing to understand is that the code inside of this tutorial works in no matter what framework or language or anything that you're using, the process is going to be exactly the same. So if you're using Next.js or if you're using React, everything is going to look pretty much identical. There just may be slight differences in how you access things. For example, getting the text and sending that along may be a different variable. Getting things from your query parameters may be a slightly different variable if you're using Express or Next.js. But everything else, like I said, stays exactly the same. All the Stripe logic, all the implementation for how you make sure you handle requests one time instead of multiple times, all of that is the same no matter what language or framework you're using.